from an undisclosed location in the Great Western Desert in the land of the free and autonomous Native American people. The 2024 presidential campaign in the next time to return all US land back to their rights owners. This is the BenZion Podcast.
Back to the BenZion Podcast. We are shifting gears a little bit today to talk about bioweapons. Generally, the focus of a lot of these programs has been on emerging computer science and advanced algorithms, particularly a lot of talk about natural language processing products, perhaps most notably ChatGPT. I think I said ChatGTP a couple of times. Whenever you notice me saying something dumb, just assume that it's a spoonerism, and I'm maybe not quite as dumb as I seem. Pretty dumb, though. But this conversation of computer science will continue in the context of the life sciences. This is inspired by an article that I read in phys.org, phys.org, quite recently, about the creation of novel entities, new forms of life, using effectively ChatGPT, natural language processing. And this has potential benefits of grand scale. I'm going to talk about a horror story right now, but we should understand that the ability to direct evolution is a terrifying but mostly good thing if all of the people concerned are doing right, which is not true of the fascist West. And this danger is why I have decided to talk about this BIOWAR scenario that you see in this the headline of this podcast. So you're a biology graduate student. You are not necessarily somebody who's going to spend 30 years in a basement being a galaxy brain and working on something that will win you a Nobel Prize. This kind of technology is maybe something that kind of almost anybody could be doing, which is why you could say that the bioweapon scenarios that have been described in recent years, we live in a world that's a little different from one of a decade ago. One where people should be wearing masks because there are a number of contagions going around which have elusive symptoms and outright confusing symptoms. And the net result of that is that a lot of people have died, but that the public health services and responses of the nations concerned hasn't always been consistent, has been completely inconsistent, and also hasn't done what is necessary to prevent this. You know, I said this to somebody the other day. The formation of the Centers for Disease Control. There's a movie about this. I'll look it up and add it in the comments. From nearly 100 years ago, about how a particular outbreak. This is a popular film, a narrative cinematic release. I think with Joseph Cotton, who's also long dead. This film basically describes a real turn of events that led to the creation of the Centers for Disease Control. And then for 3/4 of a century or so, when there was a problem that was bad enough, these people would try to solve it. But that hasn't been the response, more or less um, because something changed around 1990 in the United States, wherein you didn't just do your best to try to take care of people. We went from being a hard right country of the 20th century to a fascist country because of the intellectual sham of neoliberalism and the ability of these kinds of people to poison almost every segment of human affairs in North America. So the job that might have been done by Joseph Cotton in this story of making sure that a contagion didn't kill 2 million people, as it has on this continent, don't believe the numbers that have been cut in half to reduce those effects. And that's just the direct deaths. Indirect deaths, worsening conditions in other areas resulting from this would be more. But this should have been prevented. In a world where the fascists hadn't won, and the good people, communists, people fighting for humane and sustainable economic system, had lost. In a world where that had not happened, this would have been easily done away with. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. So, a question you should ask yourself about this AI technology generating original, novel proteins, novel living forms. A question you should ask yourself is if you are able to track this, and that third-year biology grad student would be able to do this. And the reason this is related to previous conversations is because some of this, the work product of that, is something that Chat GPT could do for you. So there is, so you know what you want to do. There's an awful lot of writing that has to be done. Chat GTP can be, and similar applications, can be tuned to generate a lot of that for you. So you're more focusing on the larger project. If an idiot like me can figure out that this can be done, and any third-year biology student could do it, what are the people who have access to early access to the fruits of the DARPA pipeline type things? What are the people who are planning these things, like the folks working government biolabs, perhaps, been able to do for the last few years? And isn't it a funny coincidence that this thing should come into existence in such a way that is publicly known at the same time, in the same decade, that there's an escalation of pandemic effects around the world? An interesting coincidence, right? I'm sure only coincidence, though. But this is this a bad thing? Is maybe the question that you should ask yourself. And in that world where the fascists hadn't won, this would not be a bad thing. But in a world where the fascists are winning, the world that you actually live in, this is a terribly bad thing, because these people are not responsible enough to have this Pandora's box opened, to be the ones opening it. This is why I would encourage you to consider the ideas put forth in this podcast, which I, in a word, will call techno-communism, because the alternative, I believe, is oblivion, the extinction of this species. Because as more and more of these advanced technologies are growing in scope and number, um, and potency as more and more of these things, because again, I said on another program that every quarter we learn about an environmental impact of a very unsettling and devastating kind. For emerging technology, I think that's doubly true. Every week, I think, we're learning of an emerging technology that has potentially earth shattering and devastating in the hands of fascists um, consequences. So, you know, this is the time where you can no longer afford to be the liberal who turns a blind eye to fascism and supports fascism in those ways. This is the time when you can no longer afford to be this ignoramus, essentially no different than the liberal. This is certainly no longer the time when you can afford to be the arch conservative who thinks that if they are on top of all of this, that it'll turn out fine for them, even if it kills millions of others. You are not that smart. You are just a dumb ape messing around with a rocket launcher, and you don't even know what a rocket launcher is or how to operate it. That is the state of humanity at this time. First and foremost, more important than artificial superintelligence, more important than any technology or any institutional change, is that you, all of us, become more conscientious, more ethical. And the only way to do that, you cannot do that by being a person of the liberal class or being a person of the capitalist class. You simply cannot. The only way that you can do that is to dedicate yourself to fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system, recognizing that all of these emerging technologies are so important. This is something that not all Marxists care about. Very few of them, I think. Or they care about it, but the emphasis is not there. And that is not necessarily their fault. Tech culture and tech institutions, the technology itself, have been so captured by fascists that they've kind of written it off. But still, that is not good because these things are important. And you cannot be a person who's going to survive the mid to late 21st century by disregarding these things. You must become a techno-communist. A large number of people must adopt this. And we must destroy the United States. The United States is and always has been genocidal towards specific groups of people, Native Americans and African Americans. That's true from the moment that Christ the fascists landed on these shores, and it's true at this very moment now. You notice these 2 to 2+ million people who are dead of preventable condition of the last 3 years. You'll notice darker skinned people are the ones being affected, and working class people are the ones being negatively affected. And that's not a coincidence. The United States has always been a fascist country. When people resist this term, they say, well, fascism was a particular kind of look. It was a particular kind of institution of a particular period in history. That is really not accurate, because whether you want to argue about what a person who says they are a fascist is or is not, those people who adopted that aesthetic for a brief period of a decade or a decade and a half were emulating the United States. They wanted to do what the United States had done, particularly to Native Americans and African American people. And they wanted to improve on that insanity in the context of waging war against people across the European continent and around the world. So there should be no question in your mind that the United States is a vile, vile place. Um, the fact that all of this technology is used in the way that it is holding us all back. Um, so, aside from this education and raised consciousness scenario where people become more focused on this sort of thing, that's not enough because this antichrist version of the CDC that I described some moments ago is, you know, this pure evil is something that could destroy the world um, through the actions of some small number of people, um, and that could happen whether or not consciousness is raised on this in these areas in the course of the next decade or two. It doesn't. It like I said, a third-year grad student can disrupt the entirety of the world with this kind of technology. Are they sufficiently evil or stupid? Um, and the United States is that place that's sufficiently evil and stupid. I'm reminded of a quote from a man named William Blum, who said, and I'll read the quote rather than paraphrasing it as I sometimes want to do. Um, and he said, no matter how paranoid or conspiracy minded you are, what the government, the fascist USA, is actually doing is worse than you imagine. And this is somebody who worked in this. It wasn't somebody like BenZion who nibbled at the edges of it and formed some hypotheses. This is somebody who did this job, who worked for the Christ of Fascists in Action, who worked for the CIA, and went on to write a book called Rogue State, A Guide to the World's Only Superpower. This is the kind. Who are the people who take this job? Grandfather, somebody who kind of took this job in engineering near 3/4 of a century ago, and a half century ago. But we all have people who we know who have made bad choices like this. But who are the kinds of people who take this job? They're people like just Christ fascists, people who are elitists, people who are invested in the team sport of U.S. hegemony to such a degree that they'll do evil things, and people have no conscience at all. Christ of fascists in action. And there's people who, presumably like William Blum, who just wanted to get a good job and make their mother proud. They joined a cult, not realizing how evil that cult was. And then how many of them go on to then have this character arc like William had, where they write an expose or are even willing to state what is true and right to anyone. None of them. Virtually none of them. This person's diamond in the rough relative to anybody who's working for the State Department in the U.S. And it's in recent decades. It's not just people who literally work for the State Department, right? I was reading commentary, someone talking about the Mises organization infiltrating a few other organizations, the Libertarian Party, and turning it from something vile in its inception, serving private wealth exclusively, into something even more vile. And that so you don't, to be a CIA asset, you don't literally have to have a resume that says I work for the CIA. Most of the people of this kind do not, and that's true. The more so true of people in tech. Tech is a high value set of properties and assets to people of this kind. So you're going to see even more of these kind of people in lurking around in this world. It's not Stark Industries R&D a department. It's definitely not that. It is a hell. And it didn't have to be this way. When I first started thinking about these kinds of things, I was a small lad. I picked up at my school library, I think, a book called Genethics. And I was fascinated by the prospect of directed evolution, something I touched on at the beginning of this conversation. And at that time, there wasn't this decay that occurred around the collapse of a socialist mandate worldwide, because that is when you see that the UK life expectancy has gone down precipitously, you see that the US life expectancy has gone down precipitously. That's because nobody cares about taking care of people anymore. This is what happens when the anti-communists, the fascists, those are synonymous. Don't kid yourself. When the anti-communists win, is death and destruction happens. And what happens when the communists win? People are taken care of. So in a world where the communists were not losing, life expectancy was going up. In a world where revolutionary communism or even socialist governments are more or less were completely done away with one or two exceptions, for 25 years. In that world, it's a world where you see just a collapse of care for other human beings. I'll read another quote to you now from a man who history has done a disservice to. And again, it's the same kind of operations that would allow people like the Libertarian Party to go from bad to worse, to be infiltrated by people like the Mises folks. It's the same kind of operations that would allow the anti-communists, people who are against building a humane and sustainable economic system and only serve private wealth, to be ascendant for a quarter of a century or more, to be in the catbird seat of world affairs. This has a tremendous death toll. It's a tremendous cost. It's held back the technological singularity by 4 decades, I believe, or more. Who knows when this will. Joseph Stalin, the head of the USSR, he did not commit genocide against his people. These are lies perpetrated by these anti-communist master manipulators, most notably the United States State Department and its various many organs. And Joseph Stalin wondered what would happen if the Soviet Union lost. And that reflects a change in mindset from the establishment of the Soviet Union and the revolutionary optimism. And I talked about this in another show, how Lenin said, well, in 1920, we now are establishing a Soviet state. We expect that by 1921 or 1922, be a Soviet world. That proved to be a little bit optimistic, but I don't fault someone for saying that. You should say this kind of thing. If you can inspire people to do the right thing by being bold in this way, why wouldn't you do that? But some decades later, Stalin started to recognize that the fascist West was kind of having its way with them, and recognizing that the people to follow him might have been compromised, and ultimately they were. People in leadership roles were compromised in the USSR. And this quote, I'll read it again rather than paraphrasing it badly. What would happen if capital succeeded in smashing the Republic of Soviets, there would set in an area of the blackest reaction in all the capitalist and colonial countries. The working class and the oppressed peoples would be seized by the throat. The positions of international communism would be lost. And lo and behold, what has happened in the last 3 decades? Cuba, a country brutally mistreated by the United States in this last 7 decades, has a longer life expectancy, now by almost 3 years, than the United States. And why? What does that happen? Are the Christo-fascists who run the United States? Are the ruling elites the ones whose life expectancy has gone down? No. Native American life expectancy has gone down by 8 years in the past 3 years. African American life expectancy has seen this rather similar precipitous drop. Working people and the colonized are the ones who are done violence to. And that's something that you should never forget. And that is what Stalin predicted would happen if the anti-communists won, and that is indeed what would happen. And what happens in a world with runaway emerging technology in that scenario? You're going to die unless we, as a species, become more enlightened and more ethical and fearless. Because the United States will most assuredly kill us all. And that is why I am running for president of the United States, to do one thing, which is to dismantle the federal government. And that is correct. I have written a draft of an executive order that will be signed on day 1 of my presidency, that will dismantle the United States federal government, placing 13 districts under the administration of Native American tribal councils around this continent. And the dissolution of these assets and properties will also be done in an orderly way, working most particularly with the 5 scientific socialist countries. And I'm not going to give you profiles of those 5 scientific socialist countries. If you're literate enough to know what they are, you understand the implications of that. This may seem like an extreme measure, but this planet is dying. These capitalists have lost the right to tell anyone what to do or to take any action, because they have killed the planet. And in the scenarios that I described, those contradictions are sharper still. Paraphrasing again, more talking points central to Marxist thought. The contradictions are sharpening. This is describing social conditions of centuries past, but those contradictions are sharper still today. You are in greater danger than you have ever been as a species and as an individual. And that is why an extreme measure, such as the disbanding of the United States federal government, is necessary at this time in history. And you cannot merely be ethical. You have to be revolutionary. You have to be willing to do the hard things that must be done, because anything less will lead to annihilation. Just as, I was going to, in this podcast, talk a little more about BIOWARs and particularly the set of contagions that are rocking this planet, and it's still rocking this planet. As many people died in 2022 as in 2021 or 2020 across across this country and across the world. Results varying, different locales, but this this is not over, and this is the result of anti-communism and fascism. And we need to recognize that not only in saying we should try in a timely fashion to build more sensible and ethical institutions. That's not enough, because those people, the Antichrist, the Christ of fascists in action, the evil ones who control the tech, they have the luxury of already having those assets, and you do not have the luxury of time in combating that. You must become more than merely a communist. You must become a revolutionary communist, willing to save yourself and humankind in what is to transpire in the course of a very, very rocky, but potentially unprecedented 21st century in terms of the good that it will yield.